Donald Trump doesn't have a natural smile. Donald Trump doesn't have a natural smile. He only has the phony smile that some people use when they pose for photographs. He doesn't use that smile much either. He never smiles the smile that people have when they don't know that they're smiling. The smile that people have when they're amused, or feel friendly, or are touched by something. Donald Trump is scared shitless. And not only at the awesome responsibility of the presidency, which he is so obviously and totally unprepared, he's scared of everything. He's so scared that he never had a waking moment of his life that other people were anything more than an audience to him. He's never been intimate with anyone. He says he's a germaphobe. He's never touched or been touched by another person. His father was a Klansman, and his mother was the bride of Frankenstein. He inherited her hairstyle, which would have been bizarre in any generation. His hair is a gesture of emotional honesty in an illusory magician's act of a public persona. His hair says, "I'm a freak. Don't touch me." Donald Trump may well be a ghost. Donald Trump is scared shitless. He's a fugitive from justice. He was a fugitive from justice on Inauguration Day. Michael Flynn is singing. And Trump feared he might from day one. Trump, the man who was never touched by a single soul, was insecure in the loyalty of a temp worker, Flynn, who he hired to make himself look like he knew something about the world. He's scared for good reason of Flynn. Flynn held the shovel while Trump buried the bodies. The bodies are now zombies rising from the earth. The criminal president, the illegitimate would-be Mussolini, the usurper of our democracy hears footsteps. Michael Flynn is singing. A plea deal was made to catch the bigger fish. Jared? Oh yeah. Don Jr.? Sure. And or the orange asshole himself? Yes, yes, and yes. Trump did everything he could to stop Mueller from making Flynn sing. But Mueller is a great impresario, and Flynn is playing Carnegie Hall. A life about money is a curse. Money isolates. I teach in a business school, and I'm a subversive. I hate everything there is about business. It's not exactly true. Look at this going concern we have right here tonight. Wow! Oh boy. Life is about living life. The struggle to survive, the struggle to create is what we humans are wired to do. Money allows some of us to avoid suffering and joy. Some of us who fly around alone in our personal airliners or live alone in penthouses of gaudy skyscrapers that have our name in letters 5 stories high shouting from the side of the building. And some of us sit at ground level and say, "Oh, this is so special. He has money. He must be so smart. He must be a good person. God rewarded him because he's such a good person." The Trump inauguration concert looked like a museum diorama set in motion. Tiny national action figures framed by Roman columns with crass amplified voices booming their will over the heads of a Where's Waldo sea of Trump supporters. The tiny actor Jon Voight hosted. Jon Voight is crazy. Who knows what made him that way? Maybe it's his acting process. He's given some great performances. Maybe he's like a boxing champion who was ultimately mentally destroyed by his drive that accomplished so much excellence in the ring. Jon Voight has fearlessly tested his mind and emotions and spirit in many films through the years. And the self-abuse in the service of art has finally caught up with him. Voigt said in his opening remarks that Trump had been relentlessly attacked when all he wanted to do was make America great again. And that he sure didn't need the job of president. It was such an odd statement on the occasion of an inauguration. Voigt was delivering lines written by the worst writer he ever worked with, Trump. Then Trump self-consciously attempted a dramatic entrance. He didn't look at the crowd, whose cheers did nothing to cheer him. His wife walked with him, but he didn't seem to know she was there. It didn't even seem like they had ever been introduced. They looked like two extremely stiff strangers walking next to each other on a very wide and empty promenade with no particular inclination to say hello to each other. At that moment, we were entering the surreal, untouchable presidency of Donald Trump. Presidents are always reflections of us, the American people, whose character changes and is demonstrated every 4 years. We were a very sad people in 2016, afraid of life and disconnected from reality. We want undeserved recognition for excelling at things that we don't know how to do. We talk a lot about hard work, but we don't do any. We're so preoccupied with ourselves that we don't see the world burning around us. We don't know how to smile. We are terrified, facing challenges that we're ill-equipped to deal with, and now it's too late. We selfishly want to get what we have coming as individuals, but even when we do, we can't enjoy it because it's impossible to escape the dystopian nightmare of society as a whole. We careen from disaster to disaster, unconcerned about the real damage being done, and obsessed by what the other dystopians think of us in the meantime. We are ciphers, completely disconnected from the light of our true natures in the depths of our souls, and too lazy, ignorant, and disinterested to even go look for that light. Reason, compassion, and real imagination are too much trouble for us. Why bother? We sit in squalor and an opioid haze, addicted sensation and concerned with nothing else but this sensation. We're not a tragedy because we've never been much to begin with. We didn't fall from grace. We wallow in the slop that we were born to live in. Oh boy, it's a bad. I see rivers of blood and soil, blood and soil. Or maybe I'm just describing the pathetic cipher our wealthy masters have forced upon us because they hold us in utter contempt. And maybe we are complicit in this state of affairs because we let them do it. Perhaps we've been innocent too long. And now it's come to this. There is nothing to fear about Trump. Nothing. Because there's nothing inside Trump. But there's plenty to fix outside of Trump. We can't accept his leadership simply because we're told to do so by people who hate us and profit from our suffering. A big part of life, with the force of natural law, is people telling you that you don't deserve what you want. And your responsive defiance and the education and satisfaction that comes from that struggle for independence. Smile. Getting made up with Meryl Streep. Streep speaks of the death of the nation. Meryl Streep used the time allotted for her acceptance of a Lifetime Achievement Award at the January 2017 Golden Globes to express her concern about the effects of Trump's persistent meanness on the rest of us, And she specifically spoke of one example among many of his vicious disrespect for others. Trump's ridicule of a disabled reporter during the violent and manipulative government takeover that was called the 2016 presidential election campaign. She pointed to Trump's unfair advantage in his bullying of a man who didn't have the power, influence, or resources to defend himself. She pointed out that it's even worse, that such behavior comes from a person in power, and it gives a green light to everyone who's predisposed to being a bully to be a bully. Streep knows how a president affects the tone of a country because she knows how a star affects the tone of a movie set. I worked with Meryl Streep for 1 week in the 1980s. I had a small role in the movie Heartburn, which was shot in New York. And Streep was under a great deal of pressure when working on this film. It was her first comedy, and it seems ridiculous to consider now, but many in the media were questioning whether she could pull it off. She had had not one career misstep in 10 years of being a huge star, and many were eager to cut her down to size. Plus, she had creative differences with her first leading man, and eventually he was replaced by Jack Nicholson. So many in the media were characterizing Streep as an egoistic diva. I was a year out of working in the resident company at Second City, and I was around 30 years old, and I was doing Louis Black's Free Show in the basement of the West Bank Cafe Theater Bar in New York, 43rd Street and 9th Avenue. The only time I felt personal confidence during that period of my life was when I was performing or writing. I made friends only through the calling card of my performances. I couldn't engage anyone in a one-on-one conversation. I was a basket case. After I got to know them, I couldn't stop talking, and I haven't changed, obviously. So anyway, Mike Nichols cast me in this movie, and my entire time on that set was an experience of terror, punctuated by commas of relief when I had to perform. And one morning I was sent to makeup. And Meryl Streep came in to be made up herself. She sat in the chair next to me, and we were together for 45 minutes. 45 minutes of my life I spent with Meryl Streep. I was paralyzed. She spent the entire time praising me, a bit as an actor, but more as a human being. I was so intelligent. I was healthy looking. She smiled at me. She said, "Oh, you're so funny." She did all that she could to boost my confidence, and she did it in such a lovely and indirect way. And it wasn't only me that Streep treated with respect and affection. Streep was kind to the makeup people, to all the actors, to everybody in the crew. She was a kind of royalty, but she was a royal who knew that we're all equal in our humanity. She wasn't the temperamental diva of the malicious press characterizations at that time. She was the opposite. And at the Golden Globe, so many years later, she revealed that her kindness to all was a kindness of a very thoughtful type. She's very aware of her responsibility to society as a whole. And Streep lectured Trump from that podium. And she lectured him because she is everything as a person that he is not, and should be as a person who holds the office of President of the United States. She is sad and prophetically disturbed that Trump gave, quote, a highly effective performance in his campaign that had nothing good about it, but achieved its desired result for its targeted audience, making them laugh and bare their teeth. Streep clearly pointed out the cultural moment of meanness before us in simple and down-to-earth terms. Now, Trump responded, we're used to this now, but he responded by by calling Streep a Hillary lover. A cunning insult with its racist echo. Translation of Hillary lover, and I'm going to beat this point to death for a reason. Get it, white nationalists? Nudge, nudge. And newly unashamed racists that are such a big part of my base and such a big part of our country, about 20% of our country. These racists, get it? Mock the Hillary lovers like the N lovers that they are. Mock them, or worse. Old dog whistle Trump telling his followers to break out the crosses and the lighter fluid and go downtown where the liberal arts majors live and stir things up a little. Some people look for answers for how to respond to Trump. Most of us deal with his fascist foot soldiers. Many of our neighbors and colleagues. I think we can take a lesson from Meryl Streep. We shouldn't be afraid of Trump and his minions. We should speak up about what we see. We should collectively stand up against Trump's words and deeds and minimize his influence. We'll probably have to take risks to speak our minds as Trump's power continues to grow, although it took a few steps back today. But silence is the greater risk. They want to hurt you anyway. I don't want to condescend. Get it? Please, get that point. They want to hurt you. They hate you. Better to speak out against it. And I'm talking about at holiday parties, at work, in the supermarket. Somebody cuts you in line, you say, you must be a fucking Trump supporter. If you're not inclined to speak out, then let your life do so. Let there be no doubt that you are outraged by all that Trump represents. This has nothing to do with politics. Nothing. Nothing. Not about Republican, Democrat, liberal, or conservative. This is decent and indecent. Human and inhumane. Period. The radical fascists are going to execute devastating public policy. Did they pass the tax thing today, the Senate? The first step?
Still up.
Still going.
They haven't passed it yet?
Not yet.
Oh, good.
The whole house about to laugh.
The radical fascists, they're trying to ruin our lives. But they can't trash our entire culture unless we let them do it. We can deny Trump much of his influence over other people's hearts and minds and eventually fix the fascist wreckage in the aftermath. This is a kind of war. Now, by this point in my life, my timidity has been destroyed by reality. I live with a kind of permanent anger, always lurking, even in my most joyful moments. But I no longer have the regret of self-betrayal. Most of this is very natural. I think it's just the aging process, really. I used to want to be recognized by the bullies. I wanted them to recognize me. Can you imagine how stupid that was? How naive? Now I just want them to leave me alone. I try to go around them and avoid them when I can, and I'll confront them if they come after me with a direct attack. Making Heartburn was obviously not very influential on my acting career. But it was tremendously influential on my life. Meryl Streep, showed me how to deal with Trump for the duration of this cancerous cultural phenomenon. So, she showed me how to be confident from a makeup chair. Meryl Streep is a real deal. She's more than a brand. She's the kind movie star who changed the way I viewed myself and the world many years ago and revealed herself to be a sincere fellow traveler at the 2017 Golden Globes. And please, here's a note. If you hear this piece as an interesting anecdote about an interaction with a celebrity, I don't know. I wrote here, you're an error, but I'd rather just say, oh, go fuck yourself. You know, I can imagine, not that, you know, obviously the critics aren't flocking, you know, so, well, name drop Meryl Streep, you know, so fuck. Anyway, humanity can accompany power. Frank McCourt slept here. Someone has always gone down your road before you do. Frank McCourt, the author of Angela's Ashes, his memoir about his childhood in Ireland, tells this brief anecdote in his essay, Learning to Chill Out, which is a good title for the Trump era. This is Frank McCourt talking. He said, after I retired, he's referring to his job as a New York City public school teacher, I did a theater act in New York with my brother Malachi about growing up in Limerick and our adventures in America. I met Frank and Malachi McCourt when I was an actor in the Second City Resident Company, and they were touring with that show, A Couple of Blaggards, in the early 1980s in Chicago. They would come by the Second City bar after the curtain of our respective shows and enjoy the free beer and liquor that actors were treated to by the generous producer Joyce Sloan. I never drank that much, but I was down there a lot because they had free pizza. And I also was down there when there were interesting people there. I mean, I talked to Timothy Leary at that bar. I talked to G. Gordon Liddy. And I talked to Olivia Newton-John. And that is a celebrity name drop. That's a celebrity name drop. Just to make the distinction. So I found Malachi and Frank like really interesting. They were charming. They were literate. They were sophisticated. They were down to earth. Malachi was more gregarious than Frank. I mean, he drank more and he drank longer. And Frank was quiet, but he had a warm and empathetic smile, and he seemed to notice more than everyone else. And he conversed with everybody, but he most impressed me with his kind silence when he was listening. And Frank McCourt now, he continues from his essay. He said, that might have been one way of putting my boyhood into literary form, but as it turned out, it wasn't honest. It was an entertainment. I don't even like it, even though we made some money out of it. I was in conflict with my brother and the producer. I had an idea and they had other ideas. They wanted a show that got laughs, but essentially it was as false as the novel. And he's talking about he tried to write a novel and it was a failed attempt, but it was part of the same inspiration that led to Angela's Ashes, which was a huge I think he got the Pulitzer Prize, a huge artistic and even commercial success. He said the problem he had with A Couple of Blaggards, he said there was no exploration. Exploration! That's a big word. And he said, I gave up fighting about it because I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to write my book. Now, Frank McCourt and I come from very different places. I'm a first-generation, middle-class Italian-American from upstate New York whose parents paid for my Jesuit prep school and for Notre Dame and for my law school education. But we each discovered ourselves, and he, of course, was born in like the worst poverty imaginable in Ireland. But we each have discovered ourselves through a painful desire to leave people and places and ideas that stymied the expression of our essential natures. And by working toward the fulfillment of that desire and the realization of that expression. So the steps have been to be in conflict with that and those that restricted us. So the first step is conflict. And then through that conflict, determining what we really wanted to do, and then doing that thing, and finally achieving peace with whoever we were in conflict with. No pain, no gain. I went to law school to please an unspoken wish of my parents. I've never liked lawyers. They preen, they demean, and all that arguing. Why are they always arguing about it? Now I know, oh, that's an unfair generalization. There are many great lawyers. Look at Mueller and what he's doing. It's so wonderful. And I know, but lawyers are assholes generally. At least the ones that I had to deal with. But there are some with fine qualities. But the point is that the archetype of lawyer was that in my mind, it was not ever an attractive thing. There's nothing about my essential being that says that I'm a lawyer. I didn't attend my law school graduation. I was out performing with a Second City touring company at this place called the Chateau Louise, which was this prefab resort. If this thing was a chateau. Anyway, now, so I had problems with law, and I blame my parents for that, I could only blame my foray into show business on myself. See, I lived much of my life in the perceived shadow of a successful older brother who was a professional football player and is a state Supreme Court justice today. Okay? And he pleased it's great to be old, because now I don't give a shit. I couldn't even talk about this before. I wouldn't talk about this. When I was 50, I wouldn't talk about this. Now, who cares? The way things are going, we're not going to have Supreme Courts anyway. So or the NFL. So it's like my brother pleased my father with his capacity to win, and I pleased my father because I made him laugh. So I said if I could win by making people laugh. And for a while I did win, or at least I modestly succeeded. I mean, I made a living at comedy. I taught improvisational comedy. But something happened. I started doing this one-man show that was purportedly a comedy show, and it was intentionally not funny. I mean, I started going out there and I just wanted to say things. And I started to hate the audience. It's like they came to see me to see a comedy. I said, why are you bothering me about trying to make you laugh? I have this I have to say. It was completely insane. And anyway, it took me decades to sort out that the conflicts of law and show business. Is it law? Is it show business? Is it law? Is it show business? Turns out it was neither. And I was in my mid-50s when I realized that teaching was the only job that I could live with to support myself. And writing was the only thing that I could do that made sense to me. I mean, so the process of self-discovery was painfully slow, and I sat for the bar exam when I was 50. I was 25 years out of law school. It was the first time I sat for it, and I passed. It was amazing. Thank you very much. I'm very proud of that too. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I needed 25 years to clear my head. Anyway, I passed it, but that was more of a spiritual accomplishment, really, than a legal one or a career one. Because it was the first step in resolving these issues. But all the while, writing was whispering. And I think it spoke so softly because I think I had to have all the confusion and all the blind alleys to go down to give me something to write about. Now, my brother got me my first job as a lawyer. I worked for a successful fundamentalist Christian attorney who represented insurance companies. Now, if there's two things that I've hated my entire life, it's fundamentalist Christianity and insurance companies. And, you know, I got fired. How did that happen? How did that happen? I mean, I was fired after I loudly told some unsurprisingly mean-spirited attorneys in the firm about their lack of decency. And I pointed out the dangers inherent in the rejection of their core humanity. And this apparently was not part of the corporate culture. I didn't see anything about it in the employee handbook. But I was fired. Okay. It's one reason, though, where I think I have insight into Trump, because I want to use this phrase, cheek to jowl with these people, which is a disgusting phrase to me, the idea of being cheek to jowl with these people. And then I got another job as a lawyer at the Disciplinary Commission. We disciplined bad lawyers. So I said, well, this is good. I hate lawyers, so at least I can do it. But I actually learned a lot about writing on that job. That's funny, because I had this one supervisor, she kept throwing a complaint back in my face. Write it better, write it better, write it better. And she taught me a lot about writing. But she also never gave me a raise. So I used that as an excuse to quit. Now, then I struck out on my own. And my understanding, and initially skeptical wife, Paula, and we weren't married that long at a time, I said, gee, honey, I'm going to give out my job as a litigation counsel, and I'm going to teach improv classes to attorneys as workshops. Can you imagine? And then I got pissed off when she didn't understand. You don't understand me. But, you know, I was a young man. I was like 58. And but I went out and I taught these classes, and, you know, they really needed it, but they didn't know they needed it. And but I worked as an adjunct at a university, and I ended up being a teacher, and I'm happy being a teacher. I mean, I use improvisation. I'm actually friends with the people that I work with. I'm not worried about like going to work and somebody's, you know, going to give me an atomic enema or something. Like, I just like, this is, so I'm happy teaching, and I'm happy writing. I already told you that. There's no talking.
I was telling her that you were my improv teacher back in the 80s.
Oh, you were telling her about that.
Right.
Yeah, I was a great influence on Skip.
He was.
Thank you. And anyway, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit in this text, which is wonderful, but I think we covered this. One thing about writing, I learned a lesson about writing from some friends of mine who write for a very successful sitcom and have for many years. And they said, don't be so precious about your words. Let them out, and if they don't work, change them. And I never stopped writing since they reminded me of that. And I think that's really good advice that they gave me. It was much more useful than a week and a half that I spent at the Iowa Summer Writing Workshop, which the school itself is very prestigious. This is for anybody who sends them, like, you know, $1,200. But, you know, their writing was calcified, it was propagated, as opposed to improvisation, which has the vitality of unfinished life. Okay. My father got sick and died. An audience member who was at my show one Saturday night offered me some reasons why people should be denied health care. They didn't take care of themselves. They were lazy. We shouldn't pay for people who don't contribute to the system. He had a very hard-nosed moral tone in his voice and his opinions. He felt certain that sick people should feel shame for what they brought upon themselves. You know who I think should feel ashamed? A fucking animal who would deny medical attention to any human being who needs it. Any human. Whether someone thinks they deserve it or not. The biggest fucking bum in the world should be taken care of if he's sick. No matter how evil he was or how undisciplined he was. And certainly, any poor people who have had their lives destroyed by the thieving rich should receive care. Any fucking buddy. When my father was dying, he was in hospice. This was back in 2008 and 2009. His care plan said he would have no invasive treatment such as radiation, but he would have all he needed for his comfort. He contracted a urinary tract infection, which could be cured easily with an antibiotic. But his nurse didn't give it to him. She said with an authority that she had no right to assume. We decided not to. We got my father that fucking antibiotic. But he had to live the last few days of his life in discomfort because Big Nurse couldn't wait for him to die. My father had done nothing wrong by anybody's standards. He would even pass muster with that stern audience member who thinks human beings should be sentenced to death for gross imperfections like smoking or an improper diet. People like the audience member believe in two things: markets and punishment. Fuck education. Fuck friendship. Fuck forgiveness. Fuck love. Fuck healthcare. Build another prison and make another judgmental remark. Yet the nurse wanted to shame my father for dying slowly, like the waitress who gives you the eye when you're holding the table for too long on a busy night. She had to save some money that could be handed to some rich people who didn't need it. Nothing in her life was more important than pleasing rich people. The shame is on her. I have struggled to understand what makes people so heartless and cruel. They so want to be understood. They want praise for being so good and decent. True Americans. They are among the worst people in the world. The standard liberal explanation is that they have suffered and that they carry on the abuse. But I no longer buy that. Their personal lousiness is a choice. Everyone that has had a tough time putting food on the table don't become as ugly and cruel as these people. My father, for example, had a very tough life. He was even sexually abused. He was sexually abused in fascist schools. I was like 16 years old. He told it to me very innocently. I put two and two together, what he was saying. He's a simple guy, you know, the Italian immigrant. He described priests in this fascist school getting into bed with him and playing with him. Okay? So this is what happened to my father by fucking fascists. When they want to talk about Charlottesville and all this other bullshit, and Bannon and Breitbart, and they bring all this shit up. And there are millions of people, and I wasn't touched, our family wasn't touched as badly as other people by fascism. That they bring this filth up so that they can make a dollar or to control. They're filth, these people. So my father was sexually abused in fascist schools in Italy, and he encountered great discrimination in America as a poor Italian immigrant. He did hard labor in an auto body shop for his whole working life, breathing in the toxic materials that ultimately killed him. But he never gave in to the harsh violence and the lack of generosity that audience member and that nurse embrace. He was confused at times, but he never took sadistic joy at the suffering of others. He wasn't ever a rich man by any means.
but he never placed even a needed dollar above another person. How these assholes lie to themselves and believe that their fear and jealousy are virtues. They resent the world because of their own material and spiritual failures. They hate the immigrants who come to their towns with nothing and subsequently thrive with hard work and initiative, while they themselves mock the educated on their way to the opioid dealer's house. Trump and Mitch McConnell aren't the problems. The audience member and the nurse are the problems. Trump and McConnell just manipulate what already exists in these walking suicides. We have this awful, immoral government because we share this nation with these awful, immoral people. I have no tolerance for what these people are. I was originally going to say for what these people believe, but this piece has nothing to do with opinions. I can't stand what these people are. They aren't what they are because of any external characteristic. It's not their race or their gender or their religion or anything else. They decided to be what they are. There's no excuse for it. They've chosen death. I want nothing to do with them until they change. And I do believe in redemption, but not compromise. Not with these people. Not now. Immigrants. Ultimately, Trump is just what is most lousy about all of us Americans broadcast through a bullhorn. We are, as a people, and myself in particular, I should say we have, lacked the gratitude to and the empathy, compassion, and sensitive awareness for immigrants and their contributions, their triumphs, and their struggles. I, for one, have no excuse for this. I should have known better. And my only explanation for my behavior is self-involvement. Oh, what am I going to do? What am I going to be? What are they saying about me? Oh, they were mean to me. Oh. This self-involvement has allowed me to tolerate and ignore every other rotten element of our evil society, a society that has enslaved people and committed genocide, oppressed weaker nations through wars of aggression, and allowed the weak to go uneducated and literally die without medical attention on an altar of greed. And those are just for starters on our list of transgressions. Our greatest pride is our ideals of democracy and freedom and community and equality. And our greatest failure is how far we fall from living those ideals in concrete reality. We should know better, and we do know better. We just don't bother. We're too easily occupied with the trivial and unimportant, that which entertains us or flatters us in some way. I confidently extend my guilt and my shame to you as well, since we are, as the slogan says, a nation of immigrants. And I know that you, as immigrants, or the children, or the descendants of immigrants, should know better too. I don't know the answers, but I know we need entirely new policies towards how immigrants are treated in this country as to matters of law and status. And we must act with more kindness and appreciation for what new Americans bring to our individual and collective lives, and with a much greater sense of fair play and justice. While policies take time to implement, attitudes can change in a heartbeat, and our resuscitated hearts should lead us on this one. The federal government has been conducting intense immigration enforcement raids across the country. The stated purpose of the raids is to facilitate the deportation of criminals who are also immigrants. But scores of immigrants without criminal records are being detained as well. And lack of documentation is being treated as if it were criminality, which it is not. Brutality is being justified by characterizing bureaucratic noncompliance as lawlessness. We have White House leadership that believes in perverted theories regarding racial and ethnic purity. But they aren't the only people who should feel shame at the violence and terror behind the rationale of these raids and their execution. We are morally culpable. I am morally culpable. Obama deported more people than any other U.S. president. What Trump is doing is really not new, it's just more extreme. We've always imported immigrants, either legally or illegally. Any questions of conformity with the law should be asked of us, not them. We import them to do our dirty work, or to do the work of genius that we're ill-equipped to do, like design rockets or conduct symphonies. But we always made sure they were the new kids. We never consistently made them feel welcome or comfortable. We always laughed at their cuisines until we asked them to turn it into gourmet fare. We always made them feel like strangers, toying with them for generations, until we made them feel at home, in their own home. We made sure that we knew that we were better than them, and that they had to please us. And recently, in the last 20 years or so, this overtly superior attitude changed, and immigrants were no longer required to display obsequious attitudes towards our seniority in time served on the North American continent. But that pissed us off. We called it political correctness. Now, Trump shows us our ugliness in extremis. And now, we want to conform who we are to who we say we are. And that's good. I repent before all the rest of you sinners for my self-righteousness. Some of my outrage at our evil king should have been reserved for myself. His sins are active ones. Mine are sins of omission. As I said, I was raised by immigrants. Most of the adults I was around when I was a child were born in Italy or other foreign countries, European countries. My father was involved with soccer. He was a major leader in that community. Every immigrant nationality was in Rochester, and they all came to our house. They were mostly European, some not. We had Italians, Germans, Portuguese, Greeks, Turks, Africans, because they were few in number, so their whole continent was represented as one group. Irish, Scottish, Ukrainian, Polish, and other groups. And I'm sure that I'm forgetting to mention. And I just looked it up, the 2010 census. Rochester still has a big immigrant population, different groups. Jamaican, Southeast Asian, Chinese, Korean, Cuban, and still, coming after generations rise and fall, Ukrainians. My father spoke with a thick Italian accent. My mother was a proud Italian cook. The first time I ever saw adults have fun, it was at a Portuguese wedding. The first person who ever, outside of my family, that ever encouraged me to develop my intelligence and go get an education was a German lady who was a friend of my aunt. The first guys that ever laughed at my jokes outside of my family were Irish and Scottish guys that played and coached soccer with my father. I grew up surrounded by warmth and energy. And then I kind of forgot who I loved as a child. I went to school and law school, and I told you the story about how confused I was. And now I find myself that I'm at UIC, and I just sort of happened into this job, and I enjoyed it very much. And a lot of the students are immigrants. I mean, it's a very diverse. You look at if you have a big classroom, if you have a class of 35 students, you'll see almost every demographic type you can think of in this classroom. And I had an experience in front of the classroom. So in many ways, I feel like I'm teaching my parents, or I had an experience happen in front of the classroom, and I wrote. This is an actual anecdote that I wrote on Facebook. It was January 27, 2017, and this was something that happened. This was right after Trump announced the Muslim ban. Muslims are banned. And of course, it's been repeatedly in court and out of court, and nobody knows what the hell's going on with it. It's exhausting. But this is when it first came out. So this was January 27th, 2017, and I wrote this on Facebook. I had a new experience today. I was teaching a class of mostly sophomores, managerial communications, and I was showing them how to write a story and make a case to assert their vision of their career. And I'm looking at them, and we have a lot of diversity at UIC. I mean, we've got blacks and Muslims and Latinos and Asians, and I'm purposely going over these lists a lot, all these different groups, documented and undocumented aliens, every demographic category that you can think of. And I started to cry. I'm standing in front of this classroom, and I just started to cry. Boom! No reason. I mean, there was a reason, but I mean, no warning. Just boom. And I thought, what is going to happen to these kids? Here I am. I'm teaching them this stuff to help them get their career started. And will they get any sort of chance at all? I don't think things are as dire and grim as they seemed on that day. But I've heard some pretty horrible stories from some of these students, from what people go through. So I just broke down crying, and then they all came up and they came around me. They all came around me. I was surrounded by that warmth and energy again. They're comforting me. And I thought, these beautiful kids, my God. Whether these policies succeed or not, they always tell stories of, I went down to Missouri and guys from India, and he said, oh, you're a terrorist, and they're afraid for their lives. They go through all this bullshit. I mean, come on. I mean, come on. I now kind of realize that was kind of the moment of my awakening, the reawakening of my love for immigrants. And I've wasted so much time concerned about nothing. I'm sorry, women, I didn't know. In the midst of the 2016 general election campaign, Donald Trump displayed calculatingly loutish behavior toward Hillary Clinton, an assertion of gender as a means of societal power, A year later, a media and social firestorm was ignited by the Harvey Weinstein revelations, and an avalanche of accusation against other powerful men ensued. Things keep getting more complicated in the relations between the sexes, involving power or otherwise, at least in the arena of public perceptions. I mean, really, just the last couple of weeks. Highly credible public witness by victims of Roy Moore's molestation of young girls, Senator pedophile. And revisiting the stories of Trump's misogynistic grabs, pun intended, of women's persons and dignity. Stand side by side with Trump henchman Roger Stone's orchestration of attacks on Al Franken, Senator Al Franken, which are made more effective because they contain an element of truth. And attention-grabbing sideshows like Wendy O. Williams' attack on perennial bad-taste whipping boy Gilbert Gottfried, claiming that the eccentric comic groped her on her live TV during an episode of her dreadful talk show several years ago. Feigned victimhood as self-promotion. NBC found out about improper sexual behavior by Matt Lauer on a Monday and fired him on a Wednesday. How much money has NBC invested in the brand Matt Lauer over decades? Garrison Keillor? I mean, who's next? Bill Nye the Science Guy? I mean, maybe it's everybody. Maybe it's everybody. And it's certainly every man. And maybe a lot of women too. I mean, I saw a woman around 50 years old wearing a t-shirt at a Trump rally on TV, and the t-shirt had an arrow pointing down, and it was inviting Trump to grab her crotch. Can't say the word? I'm sorry, I'm an improviser, so I hear everything. You mean pussy? Is that the word I can't say? There, I just said it. All right. So here comes the real sexual revolution. Could this be the beginning of a full societal and legal recognition of the human rights and equality of women? Okay, this is tremendously important, and it's very interesting, but it's not really my beat. I'm just trying to talk about how a human being kind of grapples with what's going on. Certainly this, I can't figure this out. They say you can't legislate love. Okay. Legislation only serves and defends and protects or harms. But you can love, right? So, okay, everything wrong in the world leads to Trump. He is. He's the personification of everything that was ever made that was negative in existence. And he certainly is. He certainly is with his attitude towards women. I mean, I've always been an admirer of the civil rights movement, but really more for personal reasons. I mean, I thought, oh yeah, it's like these people got shit on for so long and now they stand up for themselves. I think this works. I'll try it. I mean, of course there was empathy. I always got the justice part of it. I always got the justice. But then, I was moved 2008. I saw elderly African American people celebrating that Obama was elected. There was a black president, and they had been denied the right to vote. And I said, okay, well, I'm curious about this. So I was alone in the apartment. I don't know, Paula was doing something, and it was a snowy afternoon. It was 2014, and 12 Years a Slave was on demand. So I put that movie on. And again, of course, I understood all the injustice. And I felt that too, because I've always felt like I've received injustice. Nothing like what African Americans have gone through but I can empathize with injustice. So I understood it intellectually and I felt it. You know what I never really got? I only got it intellectually. I didn't get how cruel it was. I didn't get how cruel slavery was. I mean, yes, I knew it was cruel. And of course, I can't really know what it was like from watching a movie. But it's a good movie. And one thing art can do is it can make you feel stuff and maybe understand things a little bit more. It was unbelievable. I mean, they split families up. They beat them. They fucked them. They branded them. They hung them up in the barn, and they whipped them until they bled to death. They ran them like they thought of them like mules. They let them die in the field. I mean, it was unfucking believable how bad it was. I was thinking, if I were a black person today, I'd want to kill every fucking white person that I saw. I can't believe it. Martin Luther King, I can't believe it. I can't believe the attitude that this guy had. Talk about being a Christian or any kind of religious belief. So I saw all that, and I thought I wouldn't want to see 12 Years a Slave again. No, not again. It's like going on a diet. Once is enough. But anyway, but I'll tell you, Trump's attitude, the way Trump treated Hillary Clinton in the 2016 campaign was like a 12 Years a Slave was for women. So he had the same effect that the movie had on me, because I never really got it. I mean, the thing that I didn't understand is the oppression against women. I mean, it was even worse than with African Americans. First of all, I didn't get a lot of the injustice, but I didn't get how much it hurts. I mean, look at the way that this asshole treated him. Okay, they're competing for something and everything else. Look at the way this fucking asshole treated Hillary Clinton. And I'm not saying this to say I'm not a huge Hillary Clinton supporter or anything else. I'm just saying, look at this guy, he's in a competition with a woman. Look the way he treated this woman. I mean, first of all, the Access Hollywood tape. I mean, maybe one thing is happening with what's going on right now. I mean, it's actually like, maybe we're getting to the point, I feel sorry for young people for this. So that's really, I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth. Because, when you're young, there's a period when you just want to fuck. and thank God I was in comedy, because I got to do some fucking, because if I was left to my own device, if I wasn't on a stage, forget it. Honey, me and you, baby, that's all. because the point is that, but you got to get past that point, right? I mean, it's not like a man does. Boy, I'm really going to get into trouble, because I'm doing this. Tommy Giannis is directing me. He's saying, "What the fuck is he talking about?" And God knows what Paul is going to say. But I mean, the biological reality is that you could be 90 years old and ready to die in hospice. It's like, look at the ass on that nurse. This is what a man is. I mean, everything. It's the point is that you're not going to do anything. You're precluded from doing. Who the hell would want you to do anything? But that's the way it is. But you've got to get beyond that. And Trump, with that Access Hollywood and the way that he's anyway, this is what I got out of the Trump. 12 years of Trump. And it seems like 12 years. It's like, here's Trump world. Women are primarily of value for their sexual desirability. Other than that, fuck you, forget it. Or they're objects of derision. Hey, because if the man can't, if the man can't win you because you're a prize, you're an object, then he can put you down because that makes him feel like a big man. And by the way, I don't think there's any sexual desire in that. That's just power. I don't think Trump, he had all these, Marla Maples and everything, and he never had a heart on he enjoyed in his life. And then, or women are objects of personal gratification, which a man can earn by being rich and powerful, and that can work against men too. Once a guy told me, he said, "You don't have any money. You're never going to have a woman," and for a long time I believed him. And, if women have the temerity to make decisions about their own bodies, and it's not only abortion, they're like, a woman has to be ashamed every day of her life about everything. Oh, she's too fat, she's too thin, she didn't dress right, she doesn't look right. Oh, come, it's oppression. Women don't have the stamina, which is the biggest fucking joke in the world. They're much stronger than men. But Hillary Clinton didn't have the stamina. Women don't have the stamina to do anything, the weaker sex. I do this, but I don't do it with a bad heart, because I do it to men too. Women can be interrupted at will. And they only speak and act by the gracious allowance of men. Women are nasty, quote, bitches, who are overly emotional. They're overly emotional. I had a guy say, when you're with a woman, just grab her by the shoulders and tell her, you shut up if you don't like it. This is what this guy told me once when I was young and impressionable. I listened to his advice, and then when I got out of jail, everything was okay. I don't know where these fucking people get these ideas. Women's inferiority to men is not socially and culturally conditioned. It's biological. They are the weaker sex. And you can file this with the same people that said that black people have smaller brains than white people. This is a bigotry that I never really knew about till recently, and still obviously don't know about it. But I never realized until I saw Trump do his all too real burlesque of these ugly attitudes of how much all this has to hurt. And I never realized how unconscious and in the shadows this specific abuse and oppression is. And how even relatively happy and or very successful and or powerful women have to deal with these hardships every day. I write this piece with humility and with a healthy lack of confidence in what I'm saying, because I still have no idea about what women go through. But at age 62, I'm finally starting to realize that it's a lot, and it's very difficult, and it's much more than I ever imagined. Things that I used to think were gender differences were in reality adaptations that women made in the face of injustice. I now have a glimmer of realization of how these attitudes and related actions are things that really hurt women. I want to thank all the women in my life, starting with my wife Paula, of course, but extending to my mother and all the other women in my family, all the women here at your support, the women I work with and I've worked for, or the women I've learned with. Because as I am with African Americans, I am so moved by your resiliency and your generosity. You suffer and have suffered greatly, and you respond with love and kindness and creativity. When I'm at my best, I think I do that too. But now I'm beginning to realize that I learned it from you. Greatness. The benign, clueless often see art as the province of the young, alternately fierce and beautiful energy released into the world as an outlet for sexually sublimated desire. But for the older artist, creative work has the driving pulse of defiant life, shouting and singing a few steps ahead of death's shadow. Emily Dickinson was transcendent, deep, insightful, precise, and free. I know. I'm beyond awe. Of course. There is greatness in the world. Emily Dickinson was a soul destined for a life of self-determination. Naturally. Character is destiny, and it's inescapable. Ironically, this free spirit lived in the same home, lovingly and fearfully protected from the adventure of life by her family, and primarily her father. That's nothing new to me. I've seen the tyranny of the good family that murders what might have been, not with possessive envy, but with real concern. Emily Dickinson never married and had very few friends and acquaintances. She was an extraordinarily sensitive person, of course, and may well have died very young and in extreme violence if she had ventured away from her father's protection. Her father, an abolitionist, forbade his middle-aged son, Emily Dickinson's brother, from fighting in the Civil War. He prohibited Emily in a less explicit way from risking the bloody death we all succumb to eventually on the battlefield of life. She died anyway. Emily Dickinson lived in exile from the world. She wrote in the middle of the night when everyone who ever lived or would live was sleeping and couldn't hear her. This heroine with so much to say never had the fulfillment of understanding or acknowledgement from another human being or audience. So, many artists aren't recognized in their lifetime. Emily Dickinson's lovers were born after she was gone. Yet Emily Dickinson was not a poet of self-pity or a painter of loneliness. She experienced each moment of her life to its depths and communicated what she went through in an exquisite way. Big deal. Haven't you ever seen a hero before? Or loved before? Don't you know that life is paradoxical and ironic? Can't you see that a spinster in a repressive time and place can be as bold and world-redeeming as Joan of Arc? Emily Dickinson died at age 56. It was a clear-eyed death, one of struggle, suffering, and final acceptance. Can't you see that sometimes readers actually take on the virtues of their favorite writers? Isn't that the point? Emily Dickinson's siblings wept in the moment after she exhaled her last breath. And to them, those who had witnessed her extraordinary life, her greatness was apparent. A sister, a brother, and a sister-in-law. Yeah. I didn't know who my father was, not the whole picture, until he died. We are all unrecognized by the world and by those closest to us. Obituary writers and family eulogists for the less celebrated get the final word. It is the life, not the name that you make. Done. Emily Dickinson is a great writer. I've read great writers before. America has always been a death cult, and paradoxically a grand ideal that flourished in small and obscure places and times, like late at night in Emily Dickinson's New England home. The death blares loudly, and the idealistic art becomes a prominent thing when the end of days are startlingly imminent.
Heroes emerge, many people suffer and die, and the nation narrowly escapes its demise. Years of sleepy acceptance take what is most dear for granted until the crisis reemerges and the cycle completes itself again. Trump is an opportunity to be better individuals, to be better in our respective communities, to be a better country. This is our last initiation before changing over into a more just society. Sometimes it is less about what you do than what you are. I've wasted so much time worried about nothing. Thanks a lot. You know, this really helps us. We're obviously developing this thing, and you guys coming made a really big difference. This is Kevin Johnson. He's the stage manager. Somewhere on WhatsApp is Tommy Giannis. He's our director. And as I was saying before, now we're going to have a party. Got to give us a minute. We have to make this dump into someplace where you can have a party, and then we'll move stuff around. And please stay. There's wine, there's food, there's a lot of stuff. Have fun. Yeah, I really appreciate you guys coming. Thank you very much.
Oh, shoot. On. School's doing it? Yeah, yeah.